Good evening. We're here to talk about judges. What qualities should a judge have to earn the right to your vote? And I have with me two of the York's finest and most experienced. Sitting closest to me is Judge Euler. He's been president judge of the Court of Common Pleas for years, and he's very active on the bench. With him is Judge Emmanuel Casamatis, who's been running the Orphans Court and now is a senior judge. I'm Albert Blakey. I've been practicing in front of these two gentlemen and other judges for over 40 years, aside from being on the bench myself for about 8.5 years. We think we can bring something to this table that might help you. We have a very important election. This spring and this fall, you're going to select two judges out of a slate of 5. They'll serve an initial term of 10 years and probably run a retention term of 10 years. That means for 20 years, these successful candidates will be having a lot to say about how things go here in York County and matters that may affect you personally. We hope we can offer some insight into the qualities you should be looking for as you make what is a very important decision. I'd like to talk first about what judges do and then a little later about how they do it. I think everybody has an image of a judge sitting on a bench during a criminal trial, but I think few people realize the many other activities. So let me start with you, Judge Euler. Can you identify some of the other things judges do?
Well, the bench time's only the tip of the iceberg. Our research time, opinion writing time, meeting with counsel in pretrial conferences in preparation of a variety of cases, as well as focusing upon, and for example, the assignments that I largely am involved with, significant in-depth study of the juvenile case history files, so that when we enter the courtroom, we're well-armed and recognize all the issues that we need to confront when making a decision.
Let's talk about the categories of work. You mentioned juvenile.
Juvenile.
We talked about criminal courts. Judge Casamatis, give us some more of the things that judges have to do.
Well, there's civil court, and then there's the family court, which is really exploding, I think is the right word, in terms of the volume of cases that the judges are now hearing.
What kinds of cases?
They're hearing support cases. They're hearing custody cases. When I came on the bench, there were very few custody cases because there was a presumption that a child at tender years should be cared for by the mother. Now, in the days of equal rights, that's gone away. So fathers have the same equal rights to children. And that also has carried through on divorces, property settlements, equitable distribution, no-fault divorce. We now have a whole new area of law, protection from abuse.
What's that involve, Judge?
This involves two people who are married or living together in a personal relationship where one of them has abused the other physically or threatened to seriously abuse them. That so-called victim can come into court and get an order directing the abuser, to stop the abuse. That person can also be evicted from the home until they straighten things out, if they're ever going to straighten them out.
Judge Euler, you were presided in the Orphans Court, Judge, for a long time. I don't think people really have a good idea what the Orphans Court is all about. Can you tell us?
Certainly. The Orphans Court does not only deal with adoptions, which would be a natural follow-up of the identification of the name. But we deal with elders who have lost the capacity to make decisions and the need to appoint an independent decision maker for individuals who are incapacitated. These are called guardianship proceedings, estate matters, the probate and distribution of one's estate by way of will or trust. When matters come into dispute, the Orphans Court judge is the one who is delegated to adjudicate the issues that are raised.
All right, let's think about young children for a moment. How does the court interact with young children, dependent or delinquent?
Well, the dependency court relates to kids that are anywhere from date of birth all the way up to their 18th birthday. And the issue there relates to whether or not there is neglect within the household or the child is out of control, and a determination is made upon petition as to whether or not the court should become involved. Delinquency deals with criminal misadventures of youth between the ages of 10 to 18. And again, a child that is adjudicated delinquent or adjudicated dependent becomes what is deemed a ward of the court. We also get involved with minor settlements, where in the civil side, where a child may be the beneficiary of a civil settlement as a result of an accident, or the beneficiary under some other means of economic distribution, such as a trust or a will, and the need to appoint a guardian to oversee the funding for that child. And in addition, obviously, when you have a child who has circumstances where their parents may not otherwise be able to act on their behalf, you have guardians appointed over the person so that someone can be a substitute decision maker for them.
One court I don't think we mentioned is support court. Can you tell us about that?
That, Judge Kazamatis, you're more involved with that of recent date.
Support court involves the client going to domestic relations and filing a complaint, and the domestic relations officer gets the facts, and then they have a conference and try to work out an agreement. And if an agreement can't be worked out, then the matter is referred to the court.
Sounds to me like judges get involved in everything from birth to death and everything in between. Is that a fair summary?
That's
fair
a fair
summary.
Let's shift the conversation to a moment then as to the role of the judge. Let's go back to that criminal case. You're sitting there on the bench. What is your role? Are you an umpire, or are you something more than that?
The judge in that setting is an independent arbiter, an umpire, so to speak, as between the parties. It's not for the judge to interject him or herself on behalf of either one of the parties. That judge is there to assure a level playing field so that the defendant secures a fair trial, and the Commonwealth likewise has an opportunity to secure a fair trial on behalf of the people of this Commonwealth.
Judge Kazamatis, is that always the case? Your role is being an arbiter or an umpire, impartial?
I would like to suggest that there may be a caveat to that, and that is that sometimes the judge in a criminal case might want to make sure that he's getting adequate representation, and we don't run into the area of what we call incompetence of counsel. Because if a person goes through a criminal proceeding as convicted, and the conviction may be affirmed on appeal, then that defendant may have a right to file what we call a post-conviction act, seeking relief because his attorney was incompetent. Now, I agree with Judge Euler completely. We try and keep out of the situation, but every once in a while we may be tempted to call the attorneys, and we'll call both of them aside, and raise the issue of what we call post-conviction prophylaxis.
Oh, I've never heard that one. And you're trying to avoid a mistrial and have to do it all over again.
Exactly.
So you become a little more active at that point.
Right.
Well, we're going to be back here in a minute. I want to talk about some things that you might have to do that are outside of the courtroom.
All right.
That's good done. Let's talk about the activities judges are involved in outside of the hearing in a courtroom or in chambers. There are such duties, I believe. Can you tell us something about that, Judge Euler?
In the juvenile justice system, for example, part and parcel of the Juvenile Act is the concept that the community not only is a victim, but it is a partner in providing the competency development of the child that comes before the court. And in that respect, the court has a responsibility to not only educate the community, but to develop community participation in providing those tools that the child requires in order to successfully improve him or herself. I, for example, sought out from our local churches and synagogues, as well as the other religious groups within our community, a participatory spirit of being involved with mentoring for children. One has to go out and seek out community assistance. In addition, for example, with the courthouse itself, it was I undertook an education role for the community to enable their understanding of the significant need that we had for the development and the building of a new courthouse. That kind of community activism is a component of being a judge.
Part of your job was to see that you had a place that you could do your job in.
Amen.
Judge Kasmas, a little more on this idea of community involvement in the juvenile area. I recall names like CASA and other things. Can you tell us about the judge's role in that regard?
Surely. As Judge Euler said, it's very, very important that the community understand that they have a big role to play in working with the courts in treating and rehabilitating children. We're talking about the dependent and the delinquent children. The idea of mentoring, for example. Studies have found that one of the biggest protective factors of at-risk youngsters are those who have an adult who really takes an interest in them. In the word of one sociologist, they need someone who's crazy about them, so that youngster will never do anything to embarrass that adult. And this can be a parent, relative, teacher, friend.
Grandparent, I'll bet.
Grandparent, too, you bet. Especially grandparents. So that is a big role for them to play. We found in York County, as was found out in many other states back around 1986, that the judges and the court personnel really don't have the time to spend as much as that family needs in terms of supervision, monitoring, and reporting to the court. So we started the CASA, Court-Appointed Special Advocate Program, where we get volunteers who are trained, and they are assigned to the case as the eyes and ears of the judge, so that when that youngster comes back before the judge for review of the case to see how everyone's doing, participating in the services offered, and making progress, the judge doesn't have to depend only on the caseworker who has a vested interest in seeing to it that they look good in the way they're doing their job, and usually they do a very good job. But here we have this volunteer who's trained and can take a special interest. They frequently bond with the child and the parents and develop a trusting relationship, and it promotes quick and proper treatment and rehabilitation.
So you're more of an activist in this regard in getting the community involved as you were with the new courthouse.
That's correct.
Let's talk about the caseload and the time pressures that a judge faces these days. Do you see a problem with quantity and quality and balancing the two, Judge Euler?
There clearly is a balancing act that one needs to play under our current status. It's important that litigants that come before the courts receive a fair hearing. And not only that they receive a fair hearing, but the litigant believes that at least someone listened. And that's a difficult ideal to reach when oftentimes you have 50 to 100 cases to be assigned and heard during a one-day time period. And it's almost an impossibility. And unfortunately, the concept of cattle calls arises, wherein all the cases are set for 8:30 in the morning or 9 o'clock in the morning, and there's one just waits in line as if they were in a grocery store until their turn comes. That's not a way to mete out justice. So hence the need for additional judgeships, which have been awarded to the county by the state, and which is the subject of our session here today. But that also requires significant case management responsibilities and organizational skills upon the part of a judge. On the one hand, under the old system, judges were passive and just waited to have whatever issue was brought before him or her, and a decision would be rendered. But with issues when we have mandated time requirements in order to resolve cases, such as in support, such as in protection from abuse, delinquency, dependency, medical malpractice has been added to that list, as well as criminal cases. The assignment and the organization of progressing these cases before the court becomes a part and parcel of a judge's significant role.
So we're adding a management factor here. Is that right? Would you care to comment on that, Judge Kasman? Give us some specific examples of time pressures.
Well, for example, in juvenile cases, you have certain time periods within which the dependency and delinquency case must be heard. We have that now in support and protection from abuse cases.
You mean they have to priority?
They get priority. And because we must file our reports with the Administrative Office of the Pennsylvania Court.
Well, what happens if you have 3 different cases all demanding priority at the same time?
You do the best you can.
You do the best you can, and if you have to, you stay after hours.
That's right.
Which it isn't a big deal for the judge, because frequently he or she is there after hours anyway. But it means that all the court personnel, which the public doesn't realize, has to be there to support the judge as the judge has the hearing. Caseworker, deputy sheriffs, clerks from the court, and so on.
Diligence. Care to comment on diligence? It's my favorite word for a judge. Diligence, timely decisions. What's the story?
Well, a judge has an administrative responsibility to render timely decisions, and with substantial promptitude. The case does not improve with age if it's lingering, awaiting a decision. And it's important for all parties, particularly the litigants who have a vested interest in the outcome of the case, to have as timely a decision as possible rendered by the court. And that's one of the administrative responsibilities incorporated in our Code of Judicial Conduct, and indeed judges have reporting requirements to provide status as to unresolved and undecided cases.
I think you wanted to add something to that, Judge Kasman. Judge Eulers mentioned it, the Code of Judicial Conduct, which are canons that the Supreme Court has adopted and we must follow, specifically provides in canon number 3 that a judge should dispose promptly of the business of the court.
And what's the remedy if the judge doesn't do it?
Well, there's several remedies. The party who feels there's been a delay can contact the president judge, for example. And there also is a board, a judicial board, that enforces the Code of Judicial Conduct.
The ride's hard on you.
The ride's hard on us. So we can get reported to them, and then they get after us. And
this is beginning to sound like it's not an 8:30 to 4:30 job, gentlemen.
Not by any stretch of the imagination.
Not at all.
Judge Kasmanis, here we are in front of the media. What responsibilities, if any, do you feel a judge has to deal with the media?
I think the judge has a big role to play here to make sure that the media understands the purpose and function of the judicial system and how it's working, what the problems are. Of course, a judge can't comment about a specific case. That's highly improper. But it can meet with various representatives of the press and, for example, explain to them what juvenile justice is all about, what juvenile dependency is all about, what support cases, custody cases, because frequently it's surprising how much the city editors who are writing the headlines or the editorial writers really don't understand completely what the judicial process is about.
So you try to help clarify those issues.
Exactly.
Well, gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to sum up here a little bit. The opening pitch was that maybe we can help some people as they think about who they should vote for, what qualities they ought to be looking for. And I'm going to ask you not to give the top 10 like David Letterman, but give your top qualifications that you think a judicial candidate and a judge ought to have. Start with you.
Initially, competence, the ability to look to, adhere to statutory and precedential authority. Judges should not be making feel-good decisions based on some ideology. They should be making decisions based on principles. Impartiality, likewise, is a significant character attribute that you should be looking for in a judicial candidate, as well as fairness. All of these, coupled with the recognition that one does not, from the outset of receiving one's law license, have all the tools to become an effective judge. It's a learning process. I'm learning every day, as even now in my 15th plus year. So it's the ability to adhere to those very significant principles that I've addressed, as well as to recognize the independence of the judiciary and its role as between the executive and the legislative branch.
Okay, thank you. And Judge Kasmanis, what would you say?
Well, if I may, I'd like to quote what Socrates said over 2,000 years ago.
Good quote.
He suggested that a judge's responsibilities are to hear courteously, to answer wisely, to consider calmly, to decide impartially, and I would add one to that, to dispose promptly. So, and as Judge Euler said, judges aren't born, they're made, and it's a constant process. So you look for candidates who offer the potential for developing those kind of qualities.
Well, thank you both. I think that's a grand list of qualities, and I hope this is of help to the audience as they look at the slate that is coming before them this spring and again this fall, and it might help them choose more wisely than they would otherwise. In the final minute, I'd just like to say one other item that might be of assistance. The Bar Association conducts a poll of all of its members, asking them to rate them qualified, highly qualified, or not now qualified. And the lawyers have a stake in having judges that meet these qualities. And those results are published, and I hope you'll look at those and find those of interest too. So thank you for your attention.